Carl Jung's most terrifying case, the day the empath snaps. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, Carl Jung once said, and nowhere is this more evident than in the moment an empath finally snaps. In today's video on spiritual wisdom, we're exploring Jung's most haunting case, a transformation so profound it redefines strength, boundaries, and self-respect. As you watch, I invite you to reflect on your own journey. Have you ever reached a point where kindness was no longer enough, and you had to become something stronger? Share your experiences in the comments. Your story might be the spark that inspires someone else to reclaim their power. 1. Jung's disturbing discovery. Jung encountered a recurring and deeply unsettling pattern in empath souls who had endured years of abuse, betrayal, and relentless emotional suppression. They appeared delicate, almost fragile, as if life had pressed them into submission. Yet beneath that quiet surface lay a reservoir of untapped strength. For years, they absorbed the pain of others, silenced their own needs, and carried wounds disguised as kindness. Then, at an invisible breaking point, something extraordinary happened. The years of hidden hurt, suppressed truths, and dormant power converged into a single, irreversible transformation. Jung called this shadow integration, a moment when a person embraces the darker, unacknowledged parts of themselves and unites them with the conscious light, reclaiming the wholeness of the soul. This shift was not about turning bitter or cruel. It was a profound reclamation of self. The soul, once bound by fear and conditioned to submit, stood up and declared with quiet certainty, "No more." Jung's case notes revealed individuals who, after years of being diminished, suddenly radiated a calm, unshakable confidence. They no longer sought permission to exist, nor did they apologize for protecting their boundaries. Instead, they moved through life with a presence that commanded respect not through aggression, but through undeniable inner authority. It was as if they had retrieved lost fragments of themselves and woven them back into a complete and unbreakable whole. For many, this awakening came after crossing an unseen threshold, a point where giving without receiving, listening without being heard, and loving without being valued became unbearable. Jung likened it to a bow, drawn too tight for too long, eventually releasing its arrow with precision and force. These individuals didn't erupt in chaos. Rather, they began speaking truth with clarity, walking away from what no longer served their highest self, and living in alignment with the soul's deepest knowing. Their compassion remained intact, but it was now fortified by discernment and a refusal to self-sacrifice for the comfort of others. What made this transformation so unsettling to onlookers was its quiet finality. One day, the empath seemed compliant and accommodating. The next, they were untouchable, exuding a sovereignty that needed no external validation. Loved ones might whisper that they had changed overnight, but Jung understood that this was the end of a long, invisible journey, a soul choosing, once and for all, to stop living in pieces. And when that integration occurred, the person could never again be controlled or diminished in the same way. They became living proof that true kindness is not weakness, and that when a gentle soul remembers its own power, it ceases to be merely a survivor and becomes an unstoppable force of transformation. Are you ready to face the moment when the empath's soul awakens and shadow integration begins? If so, comment below I will rise to declare your commitment to this powerful transformation. 2. Empaths as emotional shock absorbers. Carl Jung once spoke of empaths as emotional shock absorbers, people who unknowingly carried the pain, burdens, and unspoken wounds of others, often from abusive partners, manipulative friends, or dysfunctional families, while being dismissed as too sensitive. Day after day, they learned to swallow their truth just to keep the peace, silencing their own perceptions to avoid conflict or rejection. Yet beneath the surface, something remarkable was happening. While the world saw them as fragile, they were in fact gathering precise, almost forensic psychological data on those who hurt them. Every lie, every manipulation, every subtle act of cruelty was quietly stored away, building a deep map of patterns and behaviors that others could never see. It is much like the quiet colleague in the workplace who says little but observes everything. The one who knows, who talks over others in meetings, who steals credit, who undermines the team's efforts with a smile. For years, they remain silent, their insights hidden. But one day, without warning, they finally speak, and their words land with surgical precision, dismantling illusions with undeniable truth. This is not rage. It is clarity. This is not chaos. It is controlled power. This is the moment Jung described as the empath snapping, though it is not the loss of control most imagine. Rather, it is the calm, unshakable presence of someone who has integrated their shadow, reclaimed their voice, and chosen to stop playing the role of the silent sufferer. When this shift happens, the abuser suddenly sees themselves without the comforting veil of denial. The manipulator realizes their tactics no longer work, and the empath, who once absorbed pain like a sponge, transforms into a mirror that reflects the truth back sharp, clear, and impossible to ignore. Carl Jung believed that integrating the shadow of the hidden, repressed aspects of ourselves was the key to true personal power. For the empath, this integration is not about becoming hard or unfeeling. It is about finally honoring their own boundaries and protecting their soul from further harm. They discover that sensitivity is not a flaw, but a finely tuned instrument for perceiving reality with unmatched accuracy. Every insult they endured, every injustice they witnessed, every moment they were told to get over it has been quietly sharpening their awareness. The strength they now possess is not loud or theatrical. It is steady, focused, and deeply grounded in truth. And when they finally act, they do not need to raise their voice. The weight of their authenticity carries further than any shout ever could. In this transformation lies the profound lesson that to protect one's soul is not selfish. It is sacred. Sensitivity, when fused with self-respect, becomes a force that cannot be manipulated or diminished. And for those who underestimated the empath, the most unsettling realization is this: the person they once believed they could control now stands before them as someone who will never again be afraid to use their voice. 3. The clarity event. The clarity event is a psychological and spiritual shift so profound that it feels almost supernatural in its precision. It is not a loud explosion of rage, nor a collapse into chaos, but a sudden, unshakable calm that arrives after a deep and personal betrayal, usually from someone the empath once trusted completely. For years, the empath has lived in service to others, absorbing their pain, forgiving their wrongs, and believing in their goodness. They carry unspoken wounds like invisible scars, quietly holding the emotional weight of those they love. But when the betrayal comes, something inside them breaks, not in a way that destroys them, but in a way that strips away every illusion they have ever held. In that moment, they do not scream, cry, or plead. Instead, their breathing slows, their mind sharpens, and they enter a state of clarity so intense it feels as though they can see into the very core of reality. Emotional intelligence fuses with analytical precision, and the empath begins to see patterns, motives, and truths with a depth that ordinary perception cannot reach. Masks fall effortlessly. Manipulations become transparent. Lies dissolve in the light of their awareness. It is as if the betrayal has unlocked a higher dimension of perception, turning their pain into an instrument of truth. Carl Jung observed this phenomenon repeatedly in his work, recognizing it as one of the most unsettling yet transformative events in human nature. He understood that this was not the empath's descent into madness, but their ascent into a sharper, more sovereign self. The empath, who once tolerated mistreatment, now becomes the one who exposes it not with vengeance, but with the quiet force of someone who knows. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate, Jung wrote. And in the clarity event, the unconscious bursts into the light, shattering the scripts others have tried to impose. What unnerves those around them is not anger, but the empath's ability to cut through deception with almost surgical accuracy. They no longer feel the need to explain themselves or seek approval. They simply act from truth, speak from certainty, and move through the world with an energy that can no longer be manipulated. This is the death of naivety and the birth of discernment. It is the sacred turning point where love evolves from blind devotion into wise, boundaried compassion. The betrayal that was meant to break them instead becomes the forge that tempers their soul into something unshakable. From that day forward, they are no longer just a sensitive heart. They are a mirror in which others are forced to confront themselves, often for the first time. This is why Jung saw it as both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying for those who have hidden behind lies, liberating for the one who now walks in unshakable truth. It is the moment when the empath stops being an emotional sponge and becomes an architect of their own destiny, when their compassion gains teeth, and when their spiritual presence becomes a force that cannot be ignored. If this message resonates with you, show your support, leave a like, subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss insights like this. And in the comments, declare with confidence, I see clearly, and I will no longer be betrayed. 4. From victim to strategist. Carl Jung often spoke of the profound shift that occurs when an empath reaches the breaking point, not a collapse into despair, but a complete rewiring of perception. These rare souls, once open and unguarded, had endured years of subtle betrayals, emotional exploitation, and the insidious erosion of their trust. They were not merely hurt. They were dismantled piece by piece by those who claimed to care for them. Yet, out of this dismantling emerged something extraordinary. The very sensitivity that once made them vulnerable became their most potent weapon. Their heightened pattern recognition abilities, once a passive gift, transformed into a conscious skill. They began to read people the way a seasoned navigator reads the stars instinctively, precisely, and without error. A flicker of hesitation in speech, a shift in breathing, the smallest contradiction in a story, nothing escaped their awareness. Lies revealed themselves before the sentence was finished, and hidden agendas unfolded in their minds like blueprints. Gaslighting lost its power, emotional manipulation its grip, for they now recognized these patterns instantly and dismantled them before they could take root. Jung likened this transformation to that of a chess grandmaster who has played the same opening countless times. Before the first move is complete, they already see the trajectory of the entire match. In daily life, it might be the quiet observer in the corner of the room, unnoticed by most, who nevertheless understands the true dynamics at play better than anyone else. While others are drawn in by charisma or distracted by surface appearances, the transformed empath sees directly into the machinery of intention. They no longer rush to please, to explain, or to defend. They move with calm precision, choosing when and how to engage, aware that each interaction is an energetic exchange. Their compassion remains, but it is now fortified by discernment. They can open their heart without surrendering their boundaries, love without losing themselves, and offer forgiveness without granting access to those who have proven unworthy. This mastery is not born of bitterness, but of integration. Through shadow work, they have faced the parts of themselves they once tried to deny: the anger, the grief, the capacity for fierce protection, and woven them into a whole that is both compassionate and unbreakable. They carry themselves with the stillness of someone who has nothing to prove, the clarity of one who has walked through fire and learned to breathe in the smoke without being consumed. No longer do they absorb the chaos of others. Instead, they stand as a mirror, reflecting truth back to those around them. In their presence, deception falters, manipulation withers, and authenticity rises to the surface. The soul of the empath, once fragile and easily bruised, now moves through the world with deliberate grace, neither naive nor hardened, but awake, aware, and sovereign. 5. Permanent transformation. Carl Jung spoke of transformations so profound that they altered not just the individual, but the entire dynamic of every relationship around them. Among his most striking observations were the stories of empaths who had once been fragile, self-sacrificing, and deeply wounded, yet emerged from their suffering with an unshakable strength. These were not minor recoveries. They were complete metamorphoses. Through the painful yet liberating process of shadow integration, they confronted the hidden parts of themselves, reclaimed their personal power, and rewrote the rules of how they lived and loved. They learned to establish boundaries so firm they became immovable, to give empathy selectively rather than as an endless resource for anyone who demanded it, and to rebuild their lives with precise, strategic intention. Their presence alone unsettled manipulators, not because of open confrontation, but because their energy now broadcast a clear message. The old tactics would no longer work here. In today's world, this transformation can be seen in people who walk away from toxic workplaces, manipulative relationships, or long-term patterns of self-betrayal. One woman spent over a decade being the emotional lifeline for her narcissistic boss, constantly sacrificing her own well-being to keep the peace. When she finally broke free, she didn't just change jobs, she redefined her identity. She retrained in a new field, launched her own consulting practice, and began choosing clients whose values mirrored her own. Former colleagues who had once exploited her generosity now approached her with caution, instinctively aware that her boundaries were now reinforced with steel. This is the living embodiment of what Carl Jung described. Once you integrate the shadow, you do not simply learn to play the game better, you redesign the playing field itself. The shift is not about becoming cold or hardened. It is about becoming deeply anchored in your own truth. An empath who has gone through this transformation understands that their ability to feel is not a weakness, but a powerful tool, one that must be directed with discernment. They no longer see kindness as an obligation owed to everyone, but as a sacred offering to be given to those who have earned it. They stop leaking emotional energy into bottomless pits of need and start investing it in relationships, projects, and communities that nourish their soul. They recognize that their time, attention, and compassion are valuable resources, and they guard them with a sense of self-respect that cannot be negotiated away. The manipulators, abusers, and energy drainers sense the change before a word is even spoken. There is a new tone in the empath's voice, a quiet steadiness in their gaze, and an unspoken boundary that says, "I see you, I understand you, and I will not let you in." This is why such transformations are so unsettling to those who once thrived on control, because the power dynamic has shifted forever. The empath is no longer someone to be managed, molded, or used. They have become sovereign. They have learned that permanent transformation comes from the inside out, from embracing every part of themselves, including the parts they once feared. And when that shift happens, the world around them changes too, not because they demanded it, but because their very presence requires it. Do you believe in this kind of unshakable transformation? If you do, write it boldly in the comments. I stand in my power, and I will never be broken again. 6. Psychological power and ethics. Jung saw with piercing clarity that when an empath fully integrates their shadow, they step into a form of spiritual power that is both rare and formidable. These are the souls who have walked through fire betrayed, misunderstood, and underestimated, and emerged with a calm strength that commands respect without ever needing to raise their voice. He called them balanced warriors, people who carry both the softness to heal and the steel to defend. Their presence is disarming because they embody a paradox, deeply kind to the deserving, yet utterly unshakable when faced with malice. It is as if they carry a finely honed blade in one hand and an open hand in the other, knowing exactly when to use each. In their eyes, compassion is not weakness. It is a conscious act of strength, chosen over and over again, even when the world tests them. Yet when cruelty crosses their path, their gentleness can harden in an instant, transforming into a force that will not be moved. These integrated empaths are not naive. They see through the masks people wear, sensing the undercurrents of intention and emotion with surgical precision. They can detect dishonesty in the same way one senses a sudden drop in temperature, and they will not allow it to take root in their presence. In this, Jung recognized both the beauty and the danger of such insight. Without ethical grounding, it could be twisted into manipulation, a weapon used to control. But in those whose hearts remain anchored in truth, it becomes a sacred responsibility power that exists to protect, to guide, and to liberate. They are the protectors of the vulnerable, the voice for the voiceless, and the quiet force that shifts entire rooms without needing to speak loudly. In everyday life, they might be the nurse who refuses to ignore a system that harms patients, standing against authority with steady eyes and unwavering resolve. They could be the teacher who shields a child from bullying, even when it means challenging the very institution they serve. Or they may be the friend who once allowed themselves to be drained by endless demands, but now knows the art of setting boundaries so strong that only those with pure intent can enter. These people do not seek battle, but when it comes, they face it without flinching. Their kindness is deliberate, their strength is controlled, and their actions are rooted in integrity. They remind us that spiritual strength is not about dominance, it is about alignment. It is a shield that protects, a sword that defends, and a light that reveals truth. And in the hands of those who have walked the long road of inner work, it is nothing less than a transformative force for the soul. 7. Stages of transformation. The first stage, recognition, is the moment the soul finally awakens to the truth of its own suppressed power, intelligence, and emotional depth, which for years may have been buried beneath self-doubt, fear, or the weight of societal conditioning. It is the breaking of a long silence within, a sudden clarity that what was once perceived as fragility was, in reality, dormant strength waiting to be claimed. For the empath, this is often a raw and deeply personal confrontation, a realization that their gentleness has never been weakness but an unsharpened blade, and that the capacity to feel deeply is also the capacity to endure and to protect. This awareness stirs something primal and unshakable, setting in motion the journey toward true transformation. From recognition, the path moves into integration, a stage that demands courage because it requires facing and embracing the very parts of oneself that were once denied, feared, or hidden. Here, light and shadow are no longer adversaries, but parts of a whole, woven together into a single, unbreakable identity. The soul learns that wholeness is not found in denying darkness, but in allowing it to stand alongside the light, forming a balance that strengthens rather than fractures. This is where compassion develops an unshakable backbone, and boundaries become not walls to shut the world out, but sacred lines that preserve one's peace. It is the merging of the tender heart with the fierce protector, creating a force that is as capable of love as it is of defense. The journey then moves into application, the stage where internal transformation becomes visible in every choice, word, and action. Here, emotional intelligence evolves into a finely honed tool, wielded with precision and purpose. The empath, who once absorbed the pain of others without resistance, now navigates the world with strategic grace, choosing when to engage and when to step back, no longer reacting from old wounds, but responding from conscious awareness. This is where the soul begins to live intentionally, turning lessons into lived wisdom, mastering the delicate art of staying open while remaining unshakable. Every interaction becomes an opportunity to align with truth, to act from inner strength rather than external pressure. Finally, the return to service marks the culmination of this profound transformation. In this stage, the once wounded soul steps into the role of guide, mentor, and living example, not to rescue others from their struggles, but to illuminate the path they, too, can walk. This is not a return to self-sacrifice, but to purpose, offering strength without losing oneself, sharing wisdom without imposing it, inspiring resilience by simply embodying it. The presence of such a person becomes a quiet yet undeniable force, one that uplifts without controlling, protects without smothering, and teaches without judgment. It is here that the journey comes full circle, as the soul that once fought to find itself now stands as a beacon for others, proving that true power is not about domination, but about alignment, and that the deepest strength is born from the union of light and shadow. As we explore these 4 stages of transformation, let's stand firm in our commitment to our own awakening. Your presence here shows your dedication to becoming whole. Comment below, "I am walking the path of transformation," as a declaration of your journey, and let's keep moving toward the next stage together. 8. Evolutionary significance. Carl Jung observed that awakened empaths embody one of the most advanced stages of psychological evolution, fully capable of deep empathy, yet immune to the subtle chains of manipulation, able to give profound love without losing themselves, and strong enough to set firm boundaries without apology. He understood that their path was never about discarding sensitivity, but about wielding it with conscious precision, transforming it from an unguarded vulnerability into a deliberate and unshakable strength. This moment, often mistaken by others as a breakdown, when the empath finally snaps, is in truth an awakening, a reclamation of power that is dangerous only to those who have thrived on exploiting their kindness. In life, you may see this in the friend who once said yes to everything, the colleague who always took on extra work, or the partner who sacrificed their own needs to keep the peace until one day something shifts. Without anger, without shouting, they start to say no. They stop over-explaining. They choose silence where they once pleaded, and they walk away from relationships, jobs, and dynamics that drain their soul. To those accustomed to their compliance, this change feels unsettling, even threatening. But to the empath, it is liberation. In today's world, this transformation often emerges after years in a toxic workplace, a manipulative relationship, or a family system that preyed on their willingness to give without limits. When the awakening arrives, they are no longer led by fear of rejection or guilt for prioritizing themselves. They are guided by clarity, self-respect, and an unshakable inner compass. This is what Carl Jung described as the integrated self, a person who has embraced their shadow, acknowledged their own capacity for power, and balanced it with their natural gift for compassion. They still feel deeply, but their emotions are no longer tools for others to exploit. Instead, those feelings become a finely tuned instrument for discernment, truth, and genuine connection. They can love fully without self-erasure, forgive without reopening old wounds, and give without depleting themselves. This shift teaches that true strength is not the absence of tenderness, but the mastery of it, and that real love can only flourish where healthy boundaries exist. The lesson is clear: your empathy is not a weakness. It is a rare and powerful gift, and your boundaries are not barriers to keep love out, but sacred gates that ensure love enters in its purest and most respectful form. Those who learn to honor both will live with an open heart that cannot be broken, a clear mind that cannot be deceived, and a soul that shines without fear. And so, as we close this journey into one of Carl Jung's most unsettling cases, we're reminded that even the gentlest soul can awaken a power no one sees coming. The empath's transformation is not about revenge, but about reclaiming the self and refusing to be broken again. If this message has resonated with you, I invite you to carry it forward, protect your boundaries, honor your truth, and never underestimate the quiet strength within you. Thank you for watching Spiritual Wisdom. If you found value in today's video, please like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you won't miss any of our upcoming explorations into the human soul, the hidden link between your childhood shame and adult procrastination. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Carl Jung. Have you ever wondered why you keep putting things off, even when you know they matter? What if your procrastination isn't about laziness or poor time management, but a hidden echo of childhood shame that still shapes your choices today? In this video, we'll uncover the surprising connection between your early emotional wounds and the patterns that hold you back as an adult, and more importantly, how you can break free. As you listen, I invite you to reflect on your own journey and share in the comments. Do you think your past still influences the way you act today? Let's explore this together and start transforming not just our habits, but our lives. 1. Procrastination is often rooted in childhood shame, not laziness or poor time management. Procrastination is often misunderstood as a flaw of laziness, poor planning, or lack of willpower. Yet beneath its surface lies a far more intricate truth. It is often a shield forged in the earliest chapters of life, when being fully yourself felt unsafe or unacceptable. In those formative years, perhaps your joy, curiosity, or creative expression was met not with encouragement, but with criticism, mockery, or subtle disapproval. The soul, sensitive and impressionable, absorbed a silent but powerful lesson. To be seen is to be at risk. To reveal yourself is to invite pain. And so, without realizing it, you began to retreat. You learned to delay, to hesitate, to keep parts of yourself hidden. Procrastination became a quiet guardian, not against tasks themselves, but against the deeper fear of exposure. Carl Jung's concept of the shadow reveals how these hidden fears take root. The shadow is the collection of parts of ourselves we push into darkness because we believe they are dangerous or unworthy to show. Childhood shame plants these shadows early. Imagine a child who creates something vibrant and unique, only to be told, "That's wrong," or "Why can't you be more like someone else?" In that instant, the child's soul does not hear advice. It hears a verdict. Who I am is not good enough. This verdict lingers, weaving itself into the fabric of adulthood. Years later, every meaningful project, every deeply personal endeavor, feels like stepping into the same dangerous light. Starting is no longer about the work. It is about the risk of being truly seen. As an adult, the signs are subtle but persistent. You may hesitate to speak up in meetings, not from lack of ideas, but from a fear that your voice will be dismissed. You may delay pursuing dreams, telling yourself you are unprepared, when in truth, the soul remembers the sting of earlier rejection. The mind cloaks this in rational excuses. I'll do it later. The timing isn't right. I'm waiting for inspiration. But beneath them lies the child's voice, whispering, stay safe, stay unseen. Procrastination, then, is not the enemy. It is a coping mechanism born from a soul that once needed to protect itself. Yet Jung's wisdom teaches that healing begins when we make the unconscious conscious. Recognizing procrastination as a signal rather than a defect changes everything. Instead of meeting it with shame, you can meet it with compassion. I see why I'm afraid to begin. I understand where this comes from. This awareness begins to loosen the grip of the old wound. You realize that you are no longer that powerless child. You are now the one who can create safety for yourself. And with each small step forward, you send a message to your soul. It is safe now to exist in fullness, to be visible, to act without apology. Every act of courage in the face of procrastination is an act of reclamation. It is the soul reclaiming its right to speak, to create, to live without shrinking. It is the gradual dismantling of the armor that shame built around your potential. And as that armor falls away, you begin to see procrastination not as the obstacle it once seemed, but as the shadow that pointed you toward the deepest work of your life, the work of becoming whole and finally free. 2. Shame develops when a child is told they are too much. Shame, as Carl Jung described, is not just the guilt of doing something wrong. It is the wound of feeling wrong for simply being who you are. It begins when, as a child, you are told you are too much in ways that strike at the core of your identity. Too loud, too sensitive, too emotional, too curious, not because these qualities were harmful, but because they made others uncomfortable. This is not the shame of breaking a rule. It is the shame of being made to believe that the very essence of your soul is unacceptable. When this message is repeated, the child begins to hide pieces of themselves as if locking away treasures to protect them from further rejection. They learn to tone down their joy, silence their opinions, and mute their natural energy not by choice, but as a survival strategy to belong. This self-editing becomes so ingrained that it follows them into adulthood, shaping how they show up in the world. In many cases, this early shame reappears later in life as procrastination. On the surface, procrastination might look like poor discipline or lack of motivation. But as Carl Jung often pointed out, surface behaviors rarely tell the whole truth. Beneath the delay is often the fear of being seen. When you start a project, share an idea, or take a step towards something important, you risk exposing the very parts of yourself you once hid. The thought of criticism, rejection, or hearing again that you are too much can be so paralyzing that avoiding the task feels safer than facing potential judgment. In this way, procrastination becomes an unconscious shield, keeping you invisible to protect you from pain. Daniel, a gifted graphic designer in his mid-30s, could produce stunning designs in hours, yet he often took weeks to even begin a project. To outsiders, he seemed undisciplined, but in reality, he was carrying the echoes of his father's dismissive words. As a child, every time Daniel showed his drawings, his father would say, "Too busy, not realistic, a waste of time." Those repeated rejections carved deep into his confidence. Years later, every blank canvas triggered the same fear of disapproval, and procrastination became his way of postponing that possibility. Carl Jung would explain this as the shadow at work of the parts of ourselves we have buried because someone once told us they were unacceptable. Yet these too much parts are often the most vibrant, creative, and authentic expressions of who we are. Hiding them does not protect us. It quietly starves us. Healing begins when you trace this shame back to its source. Recognize that it was never truly about your worth, and allow yourself to reclaim what you once hid. Procrastination is not proof of laziness. It is a signpost pointing to where your soul still needs permission to breathe. When you meet that fear with compassion and courage, you are not just becoming more productive, you are freeing yourself to live in the fullness of who you were always meant to be. Are you ready to embrace your whole self again? If so, comment below, "I will be me," to honor your commitment to living authentically. 3. Carl Jung's shadow concept explains this dynamic. Carl Jung's concept of the shadow offers a profound spiritual lens to understand why procrastination often runs much deeper than poor time management or lack of discipline. The shadow is made up of the parts of yourself you were told to hide, suppress, or reject, the traits, emotions, and desires that someone in your early life decided were unacceptable or too much. As a child, you quickly learned that expressing these parts could lead to punishment, ridicule, or the withdrawal of love. To survive, you buried them deep in your unconscious. But what is buried does not vanish. It lingers, shaping your adult behavior in subtle, powerful ways. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Procrastination is often one of those hidden directives. It's the hesitation before starting, the endless self-editing, the quiet avoidance, all driven by an inner voice warning you that stepping forward might mean being judged or rejected, just like before. Every time you sit down to do something important and suddenly feel the urge to check your phone, clean your space, or wait for the perfect moment, it's not random. It's a survival pattern, born from a time when taking action felt dangerous. If you were shamed for making mistakes, for showing vulnerability, or for failing to meet high expectations, your nervous system learned to link visibility with pain. Procrastination becomes your shield, delaying the moment you might fall short and re-experience that deep, familiar shame. This is why people stay trapped in cycles of delay, not because they lack ambition or intelligence, but because every step forward awakens old fears that once kept them safe. The true spiritual work isn't about forcing yourself to push through with sheer willpower, but about gently meeting and integrating the parts of yourself you were taught to fear. Jung believed that embracing the shadow is essential for wholeness, because the very qualities you hide are often the ones that hold your greatest power. This means changing the way you respond when you hesitate, asking, "What am I protecting myself from?" instead of, "Why am I so lazy?" It's practicing self-compassion, making space for imperfection, and rewriting the inner script that says you are only worthy if you never fail. When you see procrastination not as the enemy, but as a messenger, you open the door to real transformation. Each moment of delay becomes an opportunity to reassure the part of you that still believes invisibility is the only safety. As that part learns to trust, action becomes less about proving your worth and more about expressing your truth. And in that shift, fear loosens its grip. replaced by presence, courage, and the quiet knowing that every step you take is an act of reclaiming the pieces of your soul you once abandoned. 4. Procrastination functions as emotional safety. Procrastination often operates as an emotional safety net, a subtle yet powerful way the soul shields itself from the wounds it once endured. It is not simply about lacking discipline or motivation. It is a deeply ingrained survival strategy, born from moments in childhood when visibility brought pain. Perhaps it was the sting of harsh criticism, the humiliation of being laughed at, or the quiet ache of rejection. In those moments, the nervous system encoded a message. Being seen is dangerous. And from that point on, delay became protection. By putting things off, you delay exposure. By holding back, you avoid the judgment that once cut deep. Even success can feel threatening, because with recognition comes the fear of being torn down again, just as before. This is why opportunities that promise growth, joy, or acknowledgement can also stir up anxiety and resistance. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget, whispering, "Stay small. Stay safe." The procrastination you fight against today may simply be the echo of a younger self, still carrying the weight of shame, still trying to protect you from old wounds. Imagine a child who once stepped forward with excitement, only to be met with ridicule that burned into memory. Years later, as an adult, that same excitement is tangled with dread. The soul is not resisting progress, it is avoiding pain. Carl Jung taught that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. To break free from this cycle, you must turn toward the hidden part of yourself that learned to hide. Instead of attacking your procrastination as a weakness, meet it with compassion and curiosity. Ask yourself, what part of me feels unsafe to be seen? What am I protecting? Often, the answer will lead you back to that younger self, vulnerable, tender, and still longing for safety. In that moment, the work becomes spiritual as much as psychological. To stand beside that inner child, offering the reassurance and protection they never had, until the soul learns that the present is not the past. Healing this pattern requires small acts of courage, gentle steps into the light that reteach your nervous system that visibility is no longer dangerous. Share your ideas first with those you trust before revealing them to the world. Speak up in spaces where you feel supported before stepping onto bigger stages. Allow yourself to succeed in ways that feel gradual, not overwhelming. Each step becomes both a declaration and a reprogramming. I am safe now. And as your soul accepts this truth, procrastination loses its grip, not because you forced yourself into action, but because you no longer need to hide. The delay that once served as armor transforms into momentum, and the shield you once carried becomes a doorway into freedom, growth, and a life fully lived. If this insight resonated with you, give it a like, subscribe for more, and share your thoughts in the comments. Let's keep uncovering the hidden roots of procrastination together. 5. The persona versus hidden self-conflict. Carl Jung described the persona as the mask we wear to navigate the world, the polished, socially acceptable version of ourselves that wins approval and avoids conflict. Beneath that mask lives the hidden self, raw, unguarded, and completely authentic, the part that existed before shame, criticism, or rejection shaped the way we behaved. For many adults, procrastination has little to do with laziness or poor time management. It is often a quiet inner resistance that appears when a task calls for this hidden self to step forward. When what you are about to do requires more than skill, when it demands vulnerability, truth, and emotional exposure, the mask begins to feel fragile, and old memories of being shamed for your authenticity come rushing back. If, as a child, you learned that being your true self led to punishment, ridicule, or withdrawal of love, then any act of self-expression in adulthood can feel like walking into danger. Consider the coworker who stays silent in meetings despite having brilliant ideas, not because they lack insight, but because sharing those ideas would reveal their true thinking, and with it, the risk of judgment. Or the artist who keeps delaying the launch of their portfolio, telling themselves it's not ready, when the real fear is that their work will be rejected, and with it, their most vulnerable self. In modern life, these fears often hide behind polite excuses. I'm busy. I'll start next week. I work better under pressure. But beneath the surface, the conflict Jung spoke of is alive. The battle between the longing to be seen and the ingrained belief that visibility is unsafe. Procrastination, in this sense, is not about avoiding the task. It is about avoiding the emotional exposure the task demands. The nervous system remembers that authenticity once cost you something: safety, belonging, or love, and it tries to keep you in the persona's protected space. This is why some tasks you complete effortlessly, while others are endlessly postponed. It is not a question of ability. It is about whether the action will reveal your soul or allow you to keep hiding. The deeper, more personal, and more meaningful the work, the stronger the resistance, because finishing it would mean stepping beyond the mask's protection. Think of the entrepreneur who spends months perfecting a logo but never launches the business. They may be skilled in strategy and design, but pressing publish means saying to the world, "This is who I am," and risking hearing, "You're not enough." Here, procrastination becomes a shield against rejection. Jung's insight shows us that the way forward is not to fight procrastination with stricter discipline, but to bring the hidden self into safety, healing old shame, surrounding yourself with trust, and slowly allowing your real self to be seen without punishment. When the mask and the authentic self begin to align, action stops feeling like exposure and starts feeling like expression. As Carl Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. The more you nurture the hidden self and let it integrate with the persona, the less you will need to hide behind delay, and the more naturally you will move forward with courage, clarity, and peace. 6. The shame shadow loop. Shame has a way of quietly embedding itself into the deepest layers of your being, turning simple delays into a cycle far more destructive than most people realize. What begins as "I procrastinate" slowly mutates into "I am a procrastinator." And that small shift in language binds the behavior to your identity. This is the shame shadow loop Carl Jung alluded to in his teachings, a cycle where shame triggers avoidance. Avoidance breeds even more shame, and each round tightens its hold on who you believe you are. As Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Every time you avoid a task, especially one that stirs fear of failure or rejection, you are not just avoiding the work, You are avoiding the feelings and memories it awakens from childhood, moments when you were shamed, criticized, or made to feel like your worth depended on flawless performance. In this loop, temporary relief from avoidance is quickly replaced by a heavier wave of shame, whispering that your flaw is not in what you do, but in who you are. Over time, this shame becomes a silent architect of your choices, shaping your relationships, your opportunities, and even your destiny. In spiritual terms, your soul begins to carry the false belief that you are inherently inadequate, and this belief erodes the courage to show up fully in life. This is why so many people feel stuck, not because they lack discipline or time, but because their sense of self has been quietly imprisoned by old wounds. Imagine a child growing up in an environment where love feels conditional, where mistakes invite ridicule and only perfection earns acceptance. That child learns to hide, to make themselves small, to avoid any chance of being exposed. As an adult, each unfinished project and delayed decision is not laziness. It is self-protection in disguise. Breaking free requires more than forcing yourself to just do it. It demands that you turn toward the parts of yourself you've exiled, the parts carrying the shame you were never meant to bear. Jung called this bringing light to the shadow, the act of reclaiming and accepting what has long been hidden. Each time you take action, even imperfectly, you disrupt the loop and prove to yourself that you are more than the labels you've worn. Every small act becomes a spiritual rebellion against the belief that your worth is measured by perfection. And in choosing compassion over judgment, you teach your soul a new truth. You have always been worthy, even in your unfinished, imperfect state. Over time, this truth grows louder than the shame, until one day the loop breaks, not because you learned to manage your time better, but because you finally remembered who you really are. If you've stayed with us to this point, comment, "I break the cycle" below. Your words remind us we're not alone in this journey. 7. Awareness breaks the pattern. Awareness is not simply a tool. It is the quiet force that begins to dissolve the invisible chains that have bound your actions for decades. When you finally recognize that procrastination is not evidence of laziness, weakness, or a lack of discipline, but a deeply ingrained protective mechanism your soul crafted in childhood to shield itself from shame, you begin to see yourself through an entirely different lens. This understanding reveals that every moment you hesitated, delayed, or avoided was not a failure, but a form of self-preservation, a way to keep yourself safe from the piercing eyes of judgment and rejection. For many, this pattern began in the earliest years, in a home or environment where being truly yourself was met with criticism, punishment, or withdrawal of love. The child you once were taught that stepping forward, expressing ideas, or taking risks could invite pain, and so the safest choice was to hold back. This habit carried forward into adulthood, where every task you delay is not about poor time management, but about an old fear of exposure, a fear that completing something means putting your authentic self on display for others to evaluate. When you bring awareness to this hidden truth, you interrupt the automatic loop. Instead of blindly labeling yourself as lazy or undisciplined, you can meet that hesitation with curiosity, asking, "What is my soul protecting me from in this moment?" This single question transforms your inner dialogue from attack to compassion. You start to notice that the inner critic, the one who scolds you for not doing enough, is often an echo of a voice from your past, not your own true voice. With this realization, you can choose to replace that critic with an inner ally, one who understands that your delays were never about avoiding life, but about avoiding hurt. You begin to approach yourself as you would a dear friend, with patience, gentleness, and understanding. That self-compassion doesn't make you complacent. It frees you. When you no longer fight yourself, you no longer need the armor of procrastination. Action becomes less about bracing for impact and more about moving in harmony with your values and desires. Over time, this shift reshapes your entire relationship with productivity. You discover that the real work was never about forcing yourself to do more, but about creating safety for your soul to act without fear. You stop measuring your worth by how much you accomplish and start valuing the way you show up for yourself. And as this inner safety deepens, procrastination loses its grip because its original purpose protecting you has been fulfilled in a healthier way. What once felt like a battle becomes a collaboration between your conscious mind and the parts of you that once hid in the shadows. In this way, awareness is not just a moment of insight. It is the beginning of a lifelong reconciliation between who you were told to be and who you truly are. 8. Reparenting the inner child. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And nowhere is this more true than in the journey of healing from childhood shame that silently fuels adult procrastination. Growing up in an environment where being yourself felt unsafe, where showing emotions, making mistakes, or simply being seen was met with criticism, rejection, or punishment, teaches the younger self a dangerous belief. Visibility equals danger. This belief doesn't disappear with age. It hides in the background, shaping the way you work, love, and show up in the world. Procrastination in this context isn't laziness or poor time management. It's a shield, a survival strategy. Deep inside, there's a part of you that fears finishing something because being noticed could reopen old wounds. Reparenting the inner child is the key to breaking this cycle. It means becoming the loving, protective, and supportive figure you always needed but never had. It's about offering your younger self the acceptance and safety they were once denied, proving through small, consistent actions that being visible no longer equals danger. Healing doesn't happen through one grand gesture, but through everyday moments that slowly rewrite your inner story. Completing a task, speaking up in a meeting, or sharing your opinion without fear. All of these are acts of reparenting, telling your inner child, you are safe now. You can be seen. In modern life, this often shows up in subtle ways. You may be given an exciting opportunity at work, one that could bring recognition. Yet every time you try to begin, you find yourself endlessly scrolling, tidying, or convincing yourself you'll start tomorrow. Beneath the delay is the same old fear. If I succeed, they'll notice me. If they notice me, they might judge me. And if they judge me, I could be hurt. This fear belongs to the child who learned that attention was dangerous. But Carl Jung taught us that until we bring these unconscious patterns into the light, they will run our lives without us knowing. Reparenting gently challenges this fear by pairing visibility with safety, proving to your nervous system that the past no longer defines the present. With time, every small act of courage builds trust within yourself. You stop waiting for permission to exist and start meeting the world as your whole self. Procrastination loses its grip because there is no longer a need to hide from your own potential. The voice of your inner child shifts from one of fear to one of trust. I am seen. I am accepted. I am safe. This is the essence of the work, creating a new inner reality where success and safety can exist side by side. As Jung reminded us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Reparenting transforms fate into choice, shame into self-trust, and fear into freedom. Your inner child deserves to feel safe, seen, and loved. Type, I am safe now, in the comments to affirm your commitment to healing and embracing your true self. 9. Building a life where it's safe to be visible. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are," and that truth holds the key to dissolving the invisible chain between childhood shame and adult procrastination. Procrastination is rarely about laziness or poor time management. It's often a deeply rooted spiritual defense mechanism formed when, as a child, you were made to believe that certain parts of you were wrong, too much, or not enough. That early wound plants a quiet but powerful fear of being seen, and even as an adult, it can cause you to hesitate before starting something important, to delay sending that message, or to abandon projects that truly matter because exposure still feels dangerous, as if it will awaken the shame you once felt. The spiritual path to breaking this cycle begins with building a life where it is safe to be visible. This means deliberately choosing environments, projects, and relationships that allow you to exist without shrinking, pretending, or wearing a mask. It's about finding spaces where your truth is welcomed, where your mistakes are met with understanding, and where your worth is not measured by performance, but by presence. Just like a seed cannot thrive in poisoned soil, your soul cannot flourish in environments that demand you hide who you are. But in healthy, accepting soil, growth happens naturally, without forcing, without the heavy resistance that procrastination brings. This is not accidental work. It's a conscious spiritual practice that requires the courage to walk away from what constantly triggers old shame, even if it feels familiar or safe. It means asking yourself, before committing to anything, will this allow me to be more of who I am, or will it require me to be less? With each choice, you retrain your nervous system to see visibility not as a threat, but as freedom. And when you no longer fear being seen, productivity flows not because you've suddenly become more disciplined, but because the weight of fear has been lifted. You begin to act not to avoid pain, but to express your soul. As Jung reminded us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Procrastination is not your enemy. It is a signal from the unconscious, asking you to heal the wound that taught you to hide. Instead of blaming yourself for not doing enough, look at whether the spaces you inhabit nourish your spirit or suffocate it. Notice the moments you hold back and see them not as failures, but as invitations to choose safety, authenticity, and connection. When your life is built on the foundation of being fully seen, procrastination no longer needs to protect you. You move forward naturally, not by forcing yourself to work harder, but because your soul feels free to stand in the light where action, expression, and truth flow as one. 10. The goal is not to crush procrastination, but to understand and outgrow it. Procrastination is not always the enemy to be conquered. Often, it is a quiet signal from the depths of the soul, pointing towards something unresolved or unhealed. If in childhood you were taught, whether through criticism, ridicule, or rejection, that showing your true self was unsafe, your nervous system learned to equate visibility with danger. The shame that formed in those early years was not about what you did, but about who you were told you could not be. Over time, that shame wrapped itself around your authentic self, like armor protecting you back then, but imprisoning you now. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This is the hidden mechanism behind procrastination. What looks like avoidance on the surface is often a soul's instinct to protect itself from an old wound, a fear of being exposed and judged again in the same way you once were as a child. When authenticity feels unsafe, the mind finds subtle ways to delay action, endless researching instead of beginning, polishing details to perfection instead of finishing, or staying busy with safe, low-stakes tasks so that you never have to risk failure, or, even more frightening, success. Forcing yourself to push through rarely works, because it's like trying to run while still chained. The weight is not in the task itself, but in the fear of what it represents. The real path forward is not to crush procrastination, but to outgrow it by creating an inner space where your true self feels safe to emerge. This means dismantling the old belief that your worth depends on perfection or pleasing others, and instead learning to stand in your light without flinching, to speak without rehearsing for approval, and to believe you are allowed to take up space exactly as you are. When the roots of shame are addressed, something shifts. Action stops feeling like a battle and starts flowing naturally, like water moving through an open stream. The fear of being seen fades, replaced by the warmth of knowing that visibility is not a threat, but a chance to live fully. In this state, productivity is no longer a fight for discipline. It becomes the organic expression of an authentic life. You no longer work to prove your worth. You create, speak, and move forward because it honors the truth of your soul. Procrastination dissolves not because you forced it away, but because you became someone it no longer needed to protect. If this message resonates with you, affirm your growth by commenting, "I choose authenticity over fear. My actions now flow with ease and purpose." And so, while we often see procrastination as a flaw in discipline or motivation, Carl Jung's insights remind us that it can be a quiet echo of wounds carried from childhood. The shame of being told we were never enough, of feeling unseen, or of hiding our true selves. Healing isn't just about learning better habits. It's about reclaiming the parts of your soul that were silenced and giving yourself permission to show up fully. If today's message resonated with you, remember, you have the power to rewrite the story. If you found value in this video, please like, share, and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our upcoming videos. Your journey to self-awareness and transformation is just beginning.